All right, what's up? This is the December 7th Friday feedback video. This is going to be a short one because I'm out this weekend, and I just wanted to make sure you guys had something to go on before the weekend. Um, I think all of the models could benefit from some substance improvements, so I would like to do a demo Monday or Tuesday. And if you guys want to opt in to having me demo on your models, just put them on the drive. Put your Substance Painter SPP files on the drive by Monday, 5 p.m. And I will take a look at them and hopefully be able to get some demo videos recorded Monday or Tuesday, Wednesday at the latest, but we'll see. Meanwhile, let's get started and just take a look at what's here. All right, the pistol. Pistol's looking pretty nice. I think the material did a lot of legwork. I know I was somewhat critical of the level of detail in the high poly, but I think you are picking up that slack in the material pretty well here, and it looks fairly nice. I do think this side of the pistol, I know there wasn't VizDev, or at least not on the drive for this side, and maybe it would have been good to come up with something, because I think this way, this is tangent to the barrel, and this doesn't quite, this doesn't quite connect with this piece. Doesn't look as thought through as the other side, I think. But I think it's fine. It's not a huge deal. I think that would have been earlier on in the process something maybe I should have called out. But yeah, I think overall it's looking nice. I know you mentioned in your note that there's some baking issues happening. If you want to take a look at that offline, we could definitely do that. I think it's probably easily fixable. I just can't quite diagnose it with what I have here. But maybe taking a look at the UV substance file and all that would offer some insight. Textures were 4096, which they'll need to be lower for the final asset you turn into me anyway. I think 4096 is a bit high even for a AAA gun, even a first-person gun. I think that's a little bit rough on memory, but 2048 is probably fine. But yeah, for the final on the drive next week, I will want a 1K map. I do want to talk about the metallic map because I think it's not quite being used correctly here. Looks like you have kind of, I mean, the wood is black, so not metallic, which is correct. But then looking at the barrel and just this sort of steel in general, you have kind of a gray value here, which doesn't really make sense. The best practice with PBR is to have your metallic map be basically a mask, and you want it either black or white. And the only time you would have sort of a gray value is if you're transitioning from dirt or patina, and you have sort of a collection of dirt that's letting some of the metal shine through that you can't, you're basically simplifying that into a mask for a low-res texture. But for a surface in general, you would basically never want to have sort of a gray like this. And that also goes for the gold stuff here. It just doesn't read like metal here. And here it kind of does, but it's just not accurate. And if you're having an issue with if you do set something to metallic, it's going to be darker, and you can tweak the value of the base color to compensate for that. But I wouldn't fudge the metallic map to fix anything like that. You want to be honest with your metallic map and fix everything else in the other maps. On that note, it's weird to me. I would say that at least my sense of the VizDev, and you can talk to the VizDev artist obviously, so maybe you know more on this, but I got the impression that this was basically a gold or a brass surface. So I would expect this to be fully metallic, and right now it looks not very metallic. But the other thing is, this looks like the same material as the sort of gold over here and also down here. And it's weird to me that this is one value and this is just non-metallic on the metalness map. So I would say make this fully metallic, make that fully metallic, and also this inlay, because I think, and also on the other side, I think that would help sell the look a lot more, and it would also help set this out from the surface, because right now it looks kind of painted on in sort of yellow paint. It doesn't look decorative as much. So that's, and this even on this side is catching the normal from the wood, and it seems like that's not what you would want unless it's really, really thin paint, in which case that is what you'd want. But even then, you would use like a metallic gold paint, and it would have a metalness value, I would think. So yeah, I would try to be more consistent with your metallic map. But apart from that and the normal bake issue, I think this is turning out pretty nice. The feedback you said you got from your lead sounds good to me. So yeah, I think this is on a good track. Actually, hold up, I forgot. This is not correct, so I wanted to talk about this real quick. So it looks like you have a wetness parameter that's meant to make the gun shinier, probably. But this is the way this is set up. It won't do anything because you have your roughness map blended lerped with a wetness value, but the alpha is set to 0, which means that it will always select A. So it's basically taking your roughness map and blending this 0% and then putting it into the roughness. So you're basically not doing anything to your thing, and no matter what you set the wetness value to, since it's blended at 0, then nothing will happen. So what you would probably want to do is reduce the first of all, maybe just take the roughness and blend it with black. So have your roughness into the A value, and then just feed a black value into the B value, and then instead of a vector parameter, which you don't really need for, because it's got 4 whole floats in here, and you don't need 4 whole floats. You just need 1. So make a scalar parameter from 0 to 1 and put that into the alpha. And your scalar parameter can be called wetness, and that can control how much it goes up and down and how much it blends with a darker roughness value. And I think that'll give you a better result. But yeah, this thing right now, you may have found that it doesn't have any result in the material, and that's the reason why. So yeah. So looking at Casey's treasure chest, we talked back and forth in a spooky Google Doc about the scale issue. This is one of 2 models that has not been able to get to a correct scale for the assignment so far. So I want to show you how we would debug something like that. So starting out, I would go into Maya, Settings, Preferences, and go to Settings, and make sure that my working units is set to centimeter, because when you export from Maya, the units should be equivalent to Unreal centimeters. So mine is currently set to centimeters, and if I make a block that's about 180 units tall, I will immediately see that, you know, if that's the size of a human at 180 centimeters, this is much too small. So that's working for me. If that's working for you, then and it looks correctly scaled next to your human block, I would also look in my export settings for the FBX. If you scroll down, there is under advanced options, you'll see units. If you open up units, there will be a scale factor, and mine is set to automatic, file units converted to centimeters. If this is unchecked, if your settings were correct and this is unchecked, it may be set to something else, scale factor 10 for millimeters. Like, I don't know. I would just check this and make sure it should be centimeters. It's probably automatic. Should be 1. Scale factor should be 1, and your Maya units should be set to centimeters. So if you export like that, and I'm going to actually scale this up to make sure it's looking better. Let me just group that. Also, this isn't a requirement for the assignment, but for game art, if you're making props, it can be useful to think about where to center the object, because Unreal will place the center of the origin of the object at the surface you drag to. So if I wanted to drag a treasure chest onto the ground and the origin is in the middle of it, it's going to spawn in Unreal, halfway into the ground. But on the other hand, if you move it up like this, like Mike's table or whatever, then when you drag it into Unreal and put it on the ground, it's going to be perfectly aligned. So that can be useful. Anyway, so I'm going to go and export this now that it's scaled up. And I already checked the settings, so I'll save that out. And now going into Unreal, let me grab this from off screen, but dragging in the FBX. Next thing I want to check is in your FBX import options, you have import uniform scale. And this should also be set to 1. You shouldn't be changing anything about this. And it's possible that, maybe you're getting a conversion going out of Maya and another conversion coming into Unreal, and that's why it's looking correct on your screen. But this should be 1. You shouldn't be correcting for anything in your FBX import options. So I'm going to import that, and when I drag that in, that's still pretty small actually, but it's better. You get the idea. That's basically everything I would check, and if that is all correct and it's still not importing at a correct scale, then let's link up again and try and figure out what's going on there. So that's all I have to say about scale. That all applies to your fire hydrant also, David. Now for the material, I think it's looking pretty nice. It's very close to your reference, which I think is good. I think the weirdest thing I would point out is you have like a white substance collecting everywhere like dirt, and maybe it's meant to be dust or something, but it's just so bright that it's not very realistic to me. I'm going to scale this up for now. And I think that going with something maybe a little bit darker would be more plausible. The other thing is it looks like there are places here where your wood grain is misaligned, because it looks like you have planks running this way, but then this knot seems like it's running horizontally and it's actually crossing across planks. And if I zoom in real close, it even looks like there's wood grain that's running perpendicular to the rest of the wood grain. So it looks like maybe you have 2 layers of wood grain and you rotated one of them and it's now misaligned with the other one. So just make sure all of your wood grain patterns and textures, it's pretty easy to see here. You have like horizontal ones and then vertical ones. So just try to go through your layers and make sure that all your wood grains are rotated and not just some of them, because that's an easy mistake to make. Yeah, I think those are my main bits of feedback. I think the gold here is a bit too shiny. Might be able to dial that back just a little bit, but overall, nice job with the materials. I think it's doing a really good job of emulating your reference game screenshots, which is excellent. The only other thing I would say is check the inside, because you've got, looks like a lot of accidental painting in here that's not really sensical. So maybe clean that up. But overall, I think this has made a lot of progress. If you can fix the scale, maybe fine-tune the materials a bit more, I think it'll be a nice asset. I have an addendum here too. This is a parameter and you have it plugged in, so if you were to make a material instance, you would be able to edit this. However, you don't actually have, so this is, you called this instance editor, but this is not the instance editor. This is just the regular material editor with a parameter in it. If we look at, let me go back to Ben's, this is what the material instance editor looks like, and you have to make a material instance and open that to get the instance editor, and you get your parameter groups over on the right hand panel here. So you're starting out on the right track. If you have a parameter like this, you need to create an instance of your material as shown in the videos, and edit the parameter there. And I want to see screenshots where you have multiple different values for that parameter so I can see the change happening. And a bunch of people just plugged a color parameter into the base color, and I guess I didn't explicitly say not to do that, so it's fine for this week. But for the final, I definitely want to see something more practical. I think Brett had the best example where it's a color that's masked only into the metal, so you can change the color of the metal and leave the rest of it. I think that's a really nice way of parameterizing it. Also, if you just want to do the minimum maximum roughness thing and there's no other thing on your model that you think would be useful with a parameter, that's fine. But I just want to see something practical that you might actually use for a prop, because just making it all a plastic toy isn't super impressive. All right, let's look at the table. Good improvements from before, from last week. I think it does make more sense now as an asset. I think overall, it just would benefit from a lot more time spent on it. And I know time can be difficult to come by, but just in general, like, it looks like you listened to my thoughts about how most of the Dishonored assets don't have a lot of metal on them. And then I also separately said if you did have a metal thing, you could put, screws on it. But now it looks like there's, unless I'm misreading this material, it looks like there's a wooden trim around it, but it is screwed on, and that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Like, you would have metal that has, that's being held on by these, or you would have wood, but you wouldn't have a bent strip of wood that's being held on by like screws or whatever, or nails. That doesn't physically mean very much to me, I think. And if you did, I don't know, actually, maybe this is the way the wood grain would be facing if you tried to make something like this. But anyway, like, I think the level of sophistication and detail on here is still pretty low compared to like the Dishonored assets. I see you added this, but it just looks like kind of a stamp as opposed to the really elaborate detail on the reference that goes, it goes from here all the way down to here. It's like carefully designed to fit in that space, and then it continues down at the foot. Like, it just takes time, and maybe in the future over break or whatever, you could do another table that's sort of like just given the time that it needs to make a really nice asset. Because I think this is turned out relatively clean, and that's good. It just needs, right now it's something that could, it could fade into the background of a game and fit in pretty nicely, but you wouldn't want to put it in your portfolio because it's just sort of like, I think also just the feet are really, really thin. Like, you wouldn't feel safe putting things on this table, anything heavier than like this, because what if it fell? What if these snapped? I wouldn't feel like I could safely store like a pile of books on this table without it shattering. So maybe that's something to consider also. But I wanted to also point out in here, so I already talked about the color thing in Casey's feedback, and that applies here too. Like, I'll want to see something a bit more thoughtful use of parameters here. But you have the min and max roughness thing that I talked about here, but it's not connected correctly, because you have the alpha plugged into the ambient occlusion output, and as you can see, it's already plugged into the ambient occlusion, and you're using it to generate your roughness, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And looking at here, I think I didn't recreate that, but let me double check. Yeah, no, I plugged it in straight. So, this is what your roughness should look like, and I would assume you're not even using your roughness map now in this material, so you don't want to plug it in like this. You want to at least connect the green one to the alpha rather than the red channel. So that's something to look out for. Last thing is materials-wise. If I look at the roughness, it's pretty flat. There's not a lot of variation in the roughness here, and I think that you could do more with it. And that's something, if you want to turn in your painter file, I would love to demo with this one because I think it could show what you can get out of roughness. I think right now it's really, really smooth looking here, and that's actually okay because I do see some dirt variation in the roughness, which is good. But down here, like this looks like it's meant to be a metal thing, maybe iron, maybe rusted iron, but it doesn't make a ton of sense to me to have your metal be so weathered and old to the point that you can't even see any sort of sheen on it anymore, and then have your wood be looking super clean and relatively new. And I think getting some consistency in the age of the asset would be a nice addition here. And I think getting some lower roughness values mixed in here with your grungy surface would be an improvement. But yeah, I think that's something that I would love to talk about more with a painter file open so that I can sort of adjust it and demonstrate it. All right, the Victrola. I've never heard that word before, but you keep calling it that, so I'm going to call it that too. Yes, your use of the parameter here is really good. The mask is exactly what I was thinking about in sort of assigning this, and I think that's a really great start. So I saw your question about, how would you set a default material, because in your current iteration you're just sort of throwing out your base color map, and I actually think the base color map on the horn is really nice. I think the sort of color movement from the more saturated orange here to the darker orange on the sides, I think that helps really add a lot of life to this surface, and I noticed there's not really any of that on the back or down here, so maybe that's something to think about adding more of, because it's working really nice up here. So how do you make sure you don't throw away this? So I tried one thing which you may find useful, and that's adding a static switch parameter. So a static switch, unlike most of the other parameters which you can adjust in real time and in game, a static switch parameter can only be done in the editor. So if you're playing the game, you won't be able to run a script that changes the material live, but this is fine for most purposes. Basically, it switches something on and off. So I have one called Bell Color Override, and if you look at the material here, you'll see that I have a true or a false value for the switch. If it's false, no Bell Color Override, it just takes the base color directly. If it is true, then it does the same thing that you set up, and it lerps the color into the bell with the mask. And so you basically get to choose which of these graphs the material uses, and that can be a good optimization if you have a complicated material and not every instance is using all the parts of it. So basically, if I check this box, it's going to start recompiling the materials because, again, this happens not in real time. So here we go. I now have a vector parameter, so I can change the color, and there we go. So that's what that does. However, if I go to unlit, actually, if I go to base color, if I go to base color, you will see that I'm actually losing that nice color variation that you have in your color map. So that's not a perfect solution. I think it still looks pretty good. I don't think it's ruining the prop, but you might want a solution that gives you a bit more control. So another thing you could do, I believe there's a hue shift. Yes, there's a hue shift node. So I could disconnect this, and let me see. Yeah, let me move this back here. And so I'm now lerping again. I'm running the base color into A, and into B what I want to do is connect the same texture to texture, and then hue shift percentage is going to be a 0 to 1 value. So I'll just call it hue shift, make a static, or not a static, a scalar parameter. Set it to maximum 1. Hopefully this works. Plug that into hue shift percentage, and then the result I'm going to plug into B so that we're getting the alpha mask. So if I plug that back into the base color, this should work pretty well. So by default it's 0, so it's not doing any kind of hue shift at all. But if I set it to 0.5, yeah, there we go. And if you go back to the base color buffer, you can see that you've got a bit more color movement in there, which is nice. And going back to lit, yeah, so now, honestly, I can't really see the difference here, but I think when it gets into the warmer colors, you can kind of see it better. So that's one thing you can do. I believe there's also the saturate. No, that's not what we want. That's a math thing. There's a desaturation, and you could use this with another scalar parameter to control the saturation if you wanted to. You might not want to, but this is just another option. There's a lot you can do with sort of color and values here, and get like ultimate control over what this looks like. But I think for now, those are some options you have. My only other feedback here is I think this is also not making perfect use of the roughness map. It's pretty nice, but I think overall it looks a little bit too shiny. But also, if I go into roughness, like, this is basically all one value. I see that there's a bit of detail here, but I would really like to see more like light values where some dust would collect, you know, associated with your AO. I think that would make more sense. I see you're doing some of it here. Maybe you could bring that out a little bit more, maybe some more along these. There's a lot of potential. Also down here, like, you would definitely see a bit more roughness. I see you do have some on the worn edges, which is good. But yeah, I think like here you have a wood handle and a metal, or you have the handle is wood, and then the crank here is metal, and having them be exactly the same roughness value is a little bit hard to buy, I guess, visually. The rest of your crit got erased somehow, so I'm just gonna recover a bit of the end. I was just gonna say the record I think is the least convincing part of this material, just because it's got kind of a noise all over it, and a record would not usually look like that, you know. A record, to the extent it does have surface noise, it's all aligned in these grooves, right? So you get kind of an anisotropic reflectance specularity. It's a really particular look, and I think this just looks kind of like a wet sandpaper or something. So maybe there's something you can do here to create sort of, you know, those specks that you see like hair or whatever, that align with those curves. I've never tried to do anything specifically like that, so it might be kind of difficult, but I think that at the very least, maybe try to just smooth this out. Maybe at least have, you know, on a record, there is usually like a space between the label and the grooves that's really shiny, and then on the edge it's really shiny, and then you have tracks that are rougher where the actual grooves are, and then in between those tracks there's more bits of shiny, you know, empty space. And I don't know how much pixel resolution you have to do something like that, but I think it could help this read more as a record, because I think right now it's just looking a little bit incorrect. Time. Okay, so looking nice. I think the pattern is cool. I have a few nitpicks to get out of the way. One is this looks pretty symmetrical on the seat here, but then looking up at the back looks offset. Looks like it is maybe symmetrical, but it's not symmetrical down the center, which seems weird. But maybe that's how these were really made. I'm not sure. Your origin of your object is below the feet, which means anytime you drag this model into the editor, it's going to be off the ground by like a couple inches. So maybe just adjust that down a little bit in Maya so that it's centered on the ground. That would be nice. Materials wise, I think that your roughness is not doing as much work as it should be. If I look at the roughness, it's basically all nearly the same value. And also, it looks like in the crevices here you have a darker value, and here, around here, and that doesn't make sense physically, because that means it's getting more shiny in the crevices, whereas in real life you have two effects. You have ambient occlusion where the light is getting trapped, right? And you also have dust collecting more in those areas. And both of those things would mean that you'd get less light reflectance in those spots. So usually a roughness map would look sort of the opposite of that. In fact, I think overall this is too shiny, and if I were to invert this roughness map, that might even give me a better result. If I use a 1-, that will invert it. So let me try that and see how that looks. Because yeah, I think all of it is kind of too shiny right now. And again, like I think that's still not great just because it's so even, right? If you look here, like I was making the same complaint here, but at least it has sort of more variation. I think Casey's is a good example where the wood and the metal, it's like the most dramatic example, right? Because the wood and the metal are wildly different roughness values, and it really sets them apart and helps you read the model better. And I think that you could do something like that here. And also, you would just want, like, a big part of the importance of the roughness. Might want to clean that up there. Important part of the roughness is that it helps you read the smaller forms. And, like, stuff like this, you know, you can see it in the normal map, but if I go to, I think we talked about putting it into the base color, and you did do that somewhat, which is good. But I think you should also be able to see the same pattern in the roughness material because, you know, dust collects in the crevices. You know, it's like a mini AO, and I would like to see more of that because that will help you pop these shapes a little bit more. Meanwhile, I think the values on, or the colors and the values on the main cushions are a bit loud compared to your reference, right? Like on the reference, actually, I think it looks like the main cushions are sort of the shinier and darker material, and the leafy pattern is lighter and rougher, right? And so I would want to see that. I think that making these sort of a metallic thread is an interesting idea. It's not, as far as I can tell, it's not really true to the reference, but if you really want to take it there, I think it's okay. I would just maybe think about changing the value of the metallic thing so that it's just not so intense, because right now it's really, really jumping out as like, hey, I'm a Hawaiian shirt chair, and it doesn't have sort of that temperance of the Victorian chair, I would say. In fact, I think one of the nice things about this chair is that the wood detail is what I'm drawn to. That's the sort of loud part of this chair, and it looks really nice, and the eye is drawn to it, whereas the cushions are kind of reserved, and they're not, you know, they have decoration on them, but I'm not looking at it very closely. Whereas here, like your wood, I think it could still use more sort of color and value change, like this, where, you know, the higher areas are warmer and more saturated and lighter, and the darker areas get into that sort of burned look from the finish. Here it's still pretty even. I see that you did do some work on it, but I think it could just be a lot more dramatic. And I think that, at least going by the reference, like you want the wood to be the really nice and appealing part of this object, and then this stuff be lower key. Okay, so the tile here, this is not complete. I'm expecting, you know, parameterized material or a vertex painted material here, and that's not happening right now. That is, you know, like if I don't hear from you guys all week, I expect it to be, you know, finished, or at least, you know, finished with errors, but just not done, I think is, you know, not what I expect. Especially if you guys are not in touch to say, you know, oh, I have an emergency, or oh, I absolutely cannot figure out how to do this. Because, you know, if that's the case, then I can work with you guys. But if I hear nothing, I'm expecting it to be perfect without a hitch, you know. But that aside, I think it is looking really nice, what is here. I think your tiles are looking particularly good. I think up here it's getting a little bit crazy. I think this level of like sandblasted damage, you know, it could happen, but if this happened up here, then it would be happening down here too. And these look like relatively undisturbed apart from the cracks. They definitely don't look like they've been subjected to the same forces as up here, you know, and different types of materials react to damage and weathering in different ways, but that's not to say that this could look, you know, 1,000 years old and this could look, you know, 50 years old, because I think right now they look like they're from different millennia. Um, so maybe that's something to look at. And also just sort of the damage here still I think could use more, like if you decide to do sort of a special handcrafted material like this, it takes even more work to rough it up, right? Like these leafy bits breaking off. If you think about how stone like that would break off in real life, you wouldn't it wouldn't just break off and leave a perfectly flat surface underneath. You'd see probably kind of a base of that shape, you know, with the leafy bits on top broken off. You'd still see the outlines of all of these. You know, same goes for up here. So I think more detail and thought into the damage would be helpful, for a, you know, especially for a photorealistic sort of look. I also think that the chipping on here just looks too, it's like perfectly distributed across the entire surface on every edge, you know, and that doesn't really look natural. There's things you could do to change that, you know, you could throw like a big purlin noise on there as a mask so that you get some here, some here. You don't want it to be so irregular that it doesn't tile very well, but you do want it to be a little bit more natural looking than that. This looks like the cleaner one that you're showing in game. I think like looks really shiny. I think it looks like you have a shiny tile, a low roughness on these tiles, and I think that's actually catching the light on these chips and making them stand out, because this looks way too chipped, especially since everything else looks perfect up here. And so I would say both less chipping on this version here, and also like if you chip a finished surface, something that's really shiny, the chipped area is going to be rougher. That goes for glass, you know, finished wood, metal, whatever. Like it's almost always the case. Actually, metal can be shinier where it's worn off or if there's paint or something. But in a case like this, you would definitely have a rougher surface at the edges. Up here, I'm seeing a lot of like pitch black, which is really unappealing. Not sure if it might be just the roughness. Maybe your roughness is so low that these are just sort of chroming out. But I think that just doesn't look realistic, especially like with a surface so clean. It looks like a, you know, rather than a real temple or something, this looks like a bit of decor that you would buy at, you know, Bed Bath and Beyond or something, or like, you know, something for your bathroom. It just looks so clean and so cheap right now. I think trying to get like sort of a stone effect up here, maybe raise the roughness on the gold leaf, because I think in real life that would be, you know, it wouldn't be that shiny, especially if it's like painted onto a stone surface. You know, also looking up here, like looks like you do have just stone, so that implies that there was paint that fell off, right? So maybe leave some of that chipped paint. Maybe it's too old. But if it is too old, then again, I want to see more aging on these tiles as well. But, you know, overall, I think you're on the right track. You have a lot of good stuff to work with here. Just needs to get finished. So, yeah, good luck. Okay, the fire hydrant. Big improvements all around. I think it's nice to see you got your poly count down, and you got more detail here. It's really nice to see you were able to fit those bolts back in. I think overall this is a big improvement. I think maybe a little too shiny, but you know, that's stuff that's pretty easy to revise, pretty easy to do later on. So this model has come a really long way, which is really excellent. But you're still missing a ton of stuff for this week and a ton of stuff for prior weeks. and this is the final week for this assignment. So if you want to get a good grade, you're going to need to make up all of this missing stuff. So to run down the list real quick, you need reference screenshots of a game that you picked out that you're going to style your model after. At this point, you already made the model, so it's kind of late, but you could still pick a game and go back and revise your materials to try and match it. If not, you're going to be, dinged in the grade. You're going to lose points for that. It's still not in correct scale. I scaled it up here manually, but if I just drop it into the game, it's like microscopic. In fact, it seems like every time I've asked you to fix the scale, it's gotten smaller. So go back and, like, earlier in this video I showed with Casey's model how to troubleshoot your scale and make sure that's all set correctly. So go back and try to do everything that I talked about in that. And if it's still not working, me and Tom can try to help. If you can send, screenshots of your settings, etc., we can try to make sure that's correct, because that's also a requirement for this assignment, is that it will be in correct scale. The texture maps are not the right size. If I open these up, they are 2048 by 2048, and I believe the requirement is 1024 by 1024, so these need to be smaller for the final. This is fine for now, but yeah, your final textures are going to need to be less than that. 1024 by 1024. Your Unreal material needs to have parameters. Right now you don't have any parameters in it. I talked about that in the previous video demo for Substance Painter to Unreal. And if you watch the Intro to Materials in Unreal video series from Epic Games that I linked out to you guys, and is also in the assignment document, that goes over parameters in detail and how to use them and how to create material instances. So you are going to need to do that for the final. I talk about that a lot in this feedback video as well. So check with classmates, make sure you are going to have that done by the final due date. And so if you can correct all that stuff and also do, the final nice renders, I'm going to put up one more video demo, I forget, about how to do nice renders in Unreal. I think you'll be just about set. If you are still having trouble this coming week, you need to make sure you contact Tom or me and make sure all that stuff is worked out before the end of the week, because this is going to be, again, the final deadline for the assignment, and it needs to be complete. Won't be able to turn in incomplete work for the final. So yeah, I think one last thing, I was talking about the origin, or how the object centered in Maya affects it in Unreal like this, and this one is off center. So for the final model, this isn't required, but it would be really nice to have this centered, have the origin centered and at the bottom, so that you can just plop it on the ground without difficulty. Yeah, so that's about it for the fire hydrant. Nice work. Once again, it has come a really long way, so best of luck for the final. Okay, so we are going into the final. Final thing that's due, as you may know from the document. Everything wrapped up. I want everything finished, and I want glory shots of your work. And what that means is just nice renders. I linked you guys to Yannick Gombart's lion model before, and I'll send you these links out again. But just looking at his ArtStation, he is a very good example of someone presenting their work well. Like, this is a tiling floor texture that he made with blending between, light debris and heavy debris, and just the way that he presents it is really nice. May have reference or concepts down here, but like the important part is like this stuff, good lighting for a tiling material. For a prop, this is beautiful. He's got, slight gradation in the background. I showed you guys how to do that, or I will show you guys how to do that in the presentation demos. There's some really nice rim lighting, just beautiful 3-point lighting on this thing. You know, and you guys have had 5-6 years of art school or whatever, so you should know how to do 3-point lighting. But you know, like I want a 1920 by 1080, something like this. You know, you can have multiple shots of it in one image or not. It's up to you. Just look at this again. Like present it as nicely as you can manage, because you know you want to be treating this like your portfolio render. Um, these shots need to be in Unreal. I don't want any Arnold or V-Ray or whatever, you know, render you can do in Substance. It needs to be in game in Unreal. So something like this, make it look as nice as you can. That's what's going to be due. And shortly after this feedback, I will put up 2 demos on lighting in Unreal and also just sort of general presentation tips. And as always, if you are running into serious problems that you cannot resolve, then get in touch. Tom can help. I can help. I've done Unreal for several years now. I should be able to troubleshoot any serious issues that you run into. So, yeah, that should be it. See you guys later.